March 11, 1945, Blackett Strait, between the dark silhouettes of New Britain and New Ireland. Just before 3 in the morning, the sea is almost unnaturally calm. No wind worth naming. Only a low, oily swell sliding beneath the hulls of 24 Japanese vessels moving north in disciplined formation. Above them, the sky is moonless, a black lid pressed down on the water. Below them, somewhere in that layered darkness, a single American submarine is holding depth, engines barely turning, every sound measured, every second counted. From the outside, nothing about this night suggests disaster. The convoy moves as Japanese doctrine demands destroyers on the perimeter, cargo ships and tankers nested within, sonar sweeping in steady arcs. Radio traffic murmurs across the water, clipped voices reporting bearings, speeds, routine checks. It is the sound of confidence, of procedure, of a system that believes it is secure. Inside the submarine's conning tower, Lieutenant Commander Sam Dealey stands with one hand resting lightly on the periscope housing. He does not speak. He does not need to. His face, dimly lit by red bulbs, is calm to the point of severity. A stopwatch hangs from his neck, its glass face dull in the low light. He has been watching this convoy for hours, watching how it breathes, how it turns, how often it repeats itself. 6 torpedoes remain in his forward tubes. 24 enemy ships move above him. By any conventional measure, the arithmetic is fatal. Submarines caught inside an enemy screen rarely escape. Japanese destroyer crews are experienced now, hardened by years of anti-submarine warfare. Their sonar operators know their rhythms. Their depth charge crews are fast, aggressive, precise. If the submarine is detected, the response will be immediate and overwhelming. If it fires and is seen, the flashes and wakes will mark its position. If it dives too deep, the pressure will test steel and nerve alike. If it runs, it will be chased, bracketed, crushed. And yet Dealey does not withdraw, because he has learned something about formations like this. Something about how men trust patterns once those patterns have kept them alive long enough. This story is often told as an act of daring, sometimes as an act of madness. I have spent years reading the patrol reports, the post-war analyses, the testimonies of survivors on both sides. What emerges is neither recklessness nor luck, but a kind of cold, methodical observation. A man who understood that naval warfare, at its most unforgiving, is governed not by bravery alone, but by timing. To understand how this moment came to exist, we have to step back. Not to another battle, but to another kind of quiet. Samuel David Dealey was born in 1906, in Texas, far from any ocean. He entered the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis in an era when submarines were still regarded with suspicion by surface officers. They were considered ungentlemanly weapons, crude, unreliable. Their crews were seen as specialists, but also as outsiders. Dealey chose them anyway. By the time the United States entered the Second World War, submarines had become something else entirely. They were instruments of economic warfare, tasked with strangling Japan's ability to move oil, food, and raw materials across an ocean empire. But early in the war, they were plagued by failures. Torpedoes ran too deep. Magnetic exploders detonated early or not at all. Crews risked their lives on attacks that should have succeeded and did not. What separated effective submarine commanders from average ones was not simply courage, but adaptability. The ability to learn faster than the enemy, and sometimes faster than one's own navy. Dealey proved himself early. He had an instinct for closing distance, for pressing attacks beyond what manuals recommended. He believed that proximity reduced uncertainty. At close range, errors in estimation mattered less. At close range, a commander could see, hear, feel the enemy's movements. This philosophy would shape everything that followed. By 1944, Dealey was in command of USS Harder, a Gato-class submarine operating in the Western Pacific. The Gato boats were large, rugged, and built for endurance. They could stay submerged for long periods, but they were not silent by modern standards. Every maneuver had to be deliberate. Every order had consequences. Harder earned a reputation. Japanese destroyer crews came to know her name and to fear it. During previous patrols, Dealey had demonstrated a willingness to attack escorts directly, disabling or sinking them before they could protect the larger ships behind them. This was dangerous work. Destroyers were the natural predators of submarines. Engaging them required precision and nerve. It also disrupted Japanese assumptions. Convoys were built around the idea that destroyers deterred submarines. When destroyers became targets instead, the logic inverted. By early 1945, Japan's situation was desperate. Fuel shortages constrained training. Replacement crews were rushed through instruction. Convoys were smaller, more frequent, and often overloaded with critical supplies or troops. Every ship mattered. Every loss echoed across the shrinking map of the empire. On the night of March 11th, the convoy in Blackett Strait was performing a routine movement, but routine had become deceptive. American submarines were everywhere. Air patrols were thinning. Harbors were no longer safe. Movement itself was risk. Dealey had positioned Harder ahead of the convoy's projected track hours earlier. He did not rush. He listened. He let the formation pass over him once, marking bearings, timing sonar sweeps, noting the intervals between course changes. Japanese doctrine favored rotation. Ships exchanged positions at set times to complicate targeting. It was effective, against an enemy who saw the formation as chaos. Dealey did not see chaos. He saw repetition. The destroyers swept outward, then inward. Their sonar pulses overlapped, but not perfectly. There were moments, brief, recurring, when the coverage thinned, when the acoustic picture blurred, when a submarine, if it were already inside the formation, could move without being clearly distinguished from background noise. That was the key. Not approaching from outside, as doctrine assumed, but being inside before the attack even began. Harder had slipped into the convoy's interior during a rotation, using the confusion of maneuvering hulls and propellers to mask her own movement. Now she lay among them, invisible, patient. At 2:51 a.m., Dealey raised the periscope for a final look. He did not linger. A quick sweep. Destroyer silhouettes, the looming shapes of cargo ships, a tanker riding low in the water, heavy with fuel. He lowered the scope and spoke quietly. "Stand by." The first torpedo left the tube with a muted thump, its compressed air exhaust barely audible inside the boat. It was aimed not for a dramatic explosion amidships, but for the bow of a destroyer on the outer ring. A calculated choice. Damage, not annihilation. The impact was sharp, contained. The destroyer shuddered, its forward compartments flooding, its steering compromised. It did not sink. It drifted. That drifting mattered more than destruction. Japanese procedure demanded response. Sonar contacts were reported. Destroyers accelerated toward the estimated firing position. Depth charge crews readied their racks. But the formation was still rotating. Ships were still moving into scheduled positions. And now one of those positions was occupied by a crippled escort that could not hold station. Confusion crept in. Quietly at first. Harder moved. The submarine slid beneath the shadow of a cargo ship, its engines turning slowly, its noise absorbed into the larger vessel's wake. When the second torpedo fired, it struck a tanker's stern. Again, not a killing blow. The rudder jammed. The propeller shaft twisted. The tanker lost way and began to swing broadside. Two disabled ships inside a system that depended on motion. That was when the pattern began to break. Captains faced choices they were not trained for: maintain rotation and risk collision, or abandon formation to avoid disaster. Orders overlapped. Radio traffic thickened. Voices sharpened. Dealey watched the stopwatch. He fired again. 2 more torpedoes in quick succession. One tore open a cargo ship's holds, spilling its contents and forcing an emergency stop. Another struck a destroyer's engineering spaces, leaving it dead in the water, its crew scrambling to contain flooding. Still, Harder remained unseen. By now, the convoy commander believed he understood the situation. A submarine attack from the perimeter. Standard response: halt movement, establish a defensive circle, concentrate sonar and depth charges until contact was destroyed. It was a reasonable decision. It was also exactly what Dealey was waiting for. When the ship stopped, the sea filled with overlapping engine noise at idle, a constant, masking hum. Against that backdrop, a submarine moving slowly became almost indistinguishable. Sonar returns blurred. Bearings conflicted. Harder crept beneath a destroyer whose crew was focused on avoiding debris and burning fuel on the surface. The 5th torpedo was different. This one was aimed to destroy. It struck a tanker amidships. The explosion was violent. Aviation fuel ignited, blooming outward in a sheet of flame that lit the night sky. Burning oil spread across the water. Nearby ships caught fire. Men abandoned stations, some jumping into the sea to escape the heat. Discipline collapsed. Now there were too many emergencies, fires to fight, survivors to rescue. Orders contradicted one another. Destroyers that should have been hunting were maneuvering to avoid wreckage or assist stricken vessels. Dealey had 1 torpedo left. He used it with precision. The final shot ran through a narrowing gap between escorts and struck a cargo ship carrying munitions. The secondary explosion was catastrophic. Shockwaves rippled through the water, damaging nearby hulls, throwing men from their feet, rupturing fittings, snapping shafts. It was over. Harder did not linger. She dove, slipping away beneath the chaos, her crew silent, listening as depth charges fell elsewhere, detonating against empty water and floating debris. By the time dawn approached, the convoy was no longer a convoy. It was a field of wreckage, burning ships, damaged hulls limping away alone. 6 torpedoes had not sunk 20, 4 ships outright. That was never the point. But the convoy had ceased to exist as an organized force. Its mission was destroyed. Its cargo lost or delayed. Its escort scattered, damaged, demoralized. And the submarine that had done it was already gone. The psychological impact of such encounters was profound. Japanese sailors spoke afterward of attacks that seemed to come from nowhere, of enemies who anticipated movements before they were made. Confidence in formations eroded. Trust in procedure weakened. Crews became cautious, then fearful. Fear slows reaction. Fear fractures coordination. For American submariners, these successes reinforced a hard-earned truth: that observation and patience could be as decisive as firepower. Dealey's methods were studied, discussed, and, in some cases, quietly emulated. Close-range attacks, exploitation of doctrine, the deliberate targeting of systems rather than hulls, all became part of an evolving approach to undersea warfare. Comparisons are often made between commanders like Dealey and their Japanese counterparts. It is tempting to frame this as a contest of skill versus incompetence. That is too simple and ultimately unfair. Japanese convoy doctrine was rational, built on experience and constrained by resources. It worked until it was understood too well by the enemy. What decided nights like this was not superiority of character, but superiority of insight. After the war, Sam Dealey did not seek fame. He was killed later in 1945 during another patrol, his submarine lost with all hands. His reputation endured among submariners, passed down in wardrooms and training lectures, often stripped of embellishment and reduced to a single lesson: know the enemy's habits better than he knows his own. When I walk through archives and read the reports from Blackett Strait, what strikes me most is not the violence, but the calm with which it was executed, the measured language, the absence of triumph. Dealey wrote as if describing a problem solved, not an enemy destroyed. Perhaps that is why this episode still resonates. On that night in March 1945, surrounded by Japan's navy, a man whispered, "Fire," not because he believed himself invincible, but because he understood the machinery around him, how it moved, how it repeated, and where it failed. In war, numbers matter. So does steel. So does courage. But sometimes it is the quiet counting of seconds that decides who vanishes and who survives. If you loved this story and want more history that shocks, inspires, and motivates, subscribe to Rising Warfare, like this video, and explore the incredible tales we uncover. More amazing content is coming. And trust me, you don't want to miss it!